really have to have minutes. Okay. Anyway, what I envisioned today, ladies and gentlemen, was an opportunity for Caroline and Michael and Charlotte to just share with us some of their thoughts about what they look at moving forward when it comes to naming opportunities, fundraising associated with that. We're working to have a draft to the committee in the next few days. Here, you gave me 2 copies. In the next few days for the committee to review. But we wanted to go ahead while we had everybody under the same roof and at least have a conversation about what your input would be to us. Yeah, so in simple terms, if I could wave a magic wand and X take place, what would that look like? Okay, so go ahead.
Start with an overview and thanking the committee members who brought up the idea of the name. We should look at it, evaluate it from history presented today. You can see how this donations have long-term contributed to the naming of buildings at Road Mountain. We presented the idea for the capital campaign. There were some pieces built into that, but that's not included when we're thinking about that. Thank you.
I need that. Thank you.
Recording the conversation.
Okay. Thank you to the board members who brought this up for further discussion, as this may help to contribute to further advancing our opportunities for revenue in the future. As you know, the buildings themselves, which are there, that was a result of some very substantial fundraising. Some also named for people who worked in the area. They work to fundraise. They really have and continue to have a heart for Roper Mountain Science Center. Some of the other things, such as exhibits, those will naturally will change out. We won't have a specific exhibit in perpetuity. So the exhibits that are named will naturally flow out. So as we move on, also note that this capital campaign took place, the majority of it, during the pandemic. And not many people knew much, not the general public did not know much about what was going on in this campaign, because we targeted those who we've worked with, who are partners, true partners on the mountain for what they've done, not just this time, but what they've done in the past to forward the mission of Roper Mountain Science Center. So the naming conventions, thank you for that input. Thank you for that thoughtfulness. And we will let Michael and Caroline share.
Yes, agreed. Second, everything that Charlotte said. Thank you for your attention to this. Roper Mountain is different, and I think that some kind of a policy to recognize that makes a lot of sense, because you don't necessarily want the same things happening at a school that would happen at Roper Mountain. Part of the discussions that have been had with the Science Center Association and some of the consultants that have come in to advise them with the fundraising is this need to have namings available, and also the opportunity that the for growth in fundraising for the association would be with individual donors. They've done a great job traditionally with Fluor and Michelin and a lot of long-standing corporate supporters, but this is going to be, if the fundraising continues on the path that it is, this is going to be an opportunity for more fundraising with individuals. And so some of the path forward strategically is some events that are focused towards these individuals. And I do think that the association historically has done a great job, especially, as you saw in those early years. It's amazing what they were able to accomplish in 5 years to get it from the master plan to having all of those things fulfilled. And then with this campaign, and like Charlotte said, during a pandemic. So thank you for your attention to this, and I'm happy to answer any other questions.
I will just speak from the viewpoint of fundraising that if you offer the naming opportunity, sometimes you do get donations that you wouldn't otherwise give. People like to have their name on something. Typically, right now, we've not gone below a $25,000 donation without a naming opportunity. So we've set the bar fairly high with any kind of naming opportunity that's out there. I don't really have much else to say about that, other than I think going forward, to be able to do some issues. I think we talked about a bricks and a walkway, and that's fairly standard with a lot of fundraising, and it's not a name on a building, so to speak. But I really don't believe we would have gotten some of the donations we have gotten if we hadn't had a naming opportunity.
Well, and just to set the record here, we're approaching this in, I guess you could say, 3 definite compartments. Caroline, you mentioned the bricks and the smaller asks, if you will. Common sense is going to rule that. In other words, I don't think it's the expectation of this ad hoc committee or the board to micromanage a brick campaign, for an example. And then what we're going to try to accomplish as a takeaway from this work is 2 different sets of expectations. Number one, the guidelines you would follow to name a building or a portion of a structure or whatever there for someone that's been an educator, somebody that's being recognized for their years of service within the education community, which we already have a policy to do so. For example, in one of our agendas items today, where we named the gymnasium at an elementary school. The big focus for this group is going to be, how do we address naming rights for someone who makes that financial contribution? Or if there is a combination of physical service and a financial contribution over the years, things like that. So Doug has worked to collect a number of ideas from other districts, other similar bodies, if you will, across the country, and most especially in the Southeast region. So we'll be taking that as our recommendation from that as a draft and using that to build our work with this group. I guess my question would be then, aside from the environmental building, you have X opportunities there. They're not endless. What do you feel is the opportunity to essentially get contributions equivalent to the list of locations? So for example, you have so many classrooms that you can name. Well, you've already named one, so you've got X left. You have physical spaces around that building that you've identified that you, for this contribution, you can name this and this and this. So do you feel very, very confident that you could meet that? What are the other opportunities around the mountain outside that space? So for example, in Sims, the building's named after the Sims Foundation because they paid for it. But to my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, the classrooms inside that building not being individually named. So is it the expectation that you will also throw those spaces into the consideration once a policy has been identified?
So you're correct about most of the other space around the mountain not being named. There are a few outliers. There's the Sims Rainforest. There's a Keating Rainforest classroom. There is the HIP auditorium in Sims. But I think the potential is, with these future campaigns that the association will be doing, to have those opportunities. There to go to the first part of the question, there is interest from other folks in the new building naming. But, you know, we have put that on hold until this committee is able to weigh in on a decision on that. But there is interest in some of the other naming opportunities in the new building, and I would see that translating to the rest of the Science Center as well, logically moving forward, particularly as the spaces over time have new additions and new renovations and things like that. And I don't know if that needs to be a consideration in the naming, for example, with Sims, if you recall, and the way that it had been set up, the upstairs was just 2 classrooms. The downstairs were a bunch of health exhibits for kindergarten, and that whole building was gutted when we redid it. So those classrooms were gone. So if there was a name on the classroom, it would have been gone at that time. So I don't know if that's something to consider, is the future renovations, how they affect the naming, because essentially it's like an exhibit then, which these exhibits will naturally sunset, like Charlotte said. We won't always have that water story exhibit as the central exhibit. So those kind of take care of themselves.
Well, let me ask you this then, and this might require a little bit of research on your part, aspect, and maybe funnel that information to this committee and Doug as well, what other science centers are doing. In other words,
absolutely.
One of the to me, the heaviest lift in this conversation is going to be establishing a reasonable sunset clause. Because we can't do anything about what something has already been named. And quite frankly, the big naming opportunities out there in the past have been very legitimately recognized. I don't think there's a question there. But I think this committee all agrees that whenever our recommendation comes forward to the board, there's going to be a sunset established. So if I give you moving forward 25 grand, my name is on X for X years. Okay. So that's the math we still have to work out.
As we explore this and move forward, we know that educators who've had a reputation in education in the field of service have had their names put on, but we also know publicly that other buildings and streets that have been named for celebrities or whatever their contribution, should something happen, those names are removed.
Yes.
So as we're looking at the naming, when we use individual names versus corporations, we want to have something stated such that if there is someone whose name falls in ill repute with the community, that we reserve the right to remove that name from an instructional building or room at Roper Mountain
I
Science
think we've
Center.
already agreed that was.
Okay.
I can remember a former lieutenant governor who had a road named after him, and they got rid of that. So, no, we would definitely have, I call it a parachute clause. Okay.
And we may want to do it so that it is- name on the building, but their reputation down and so on to school. Put it on building. We know that's not fun. We don't want anybody.
So I'm going to ask the members of the committee if they have any questions or comments. Michelle?
That was on. I have a question because I think we did have a question about putting names on buildings and not on classrooms, and entranceways were fine. But did we say something about putting names on buildings?
In the listings that we have looked at so far, other areas, there are components where another body has a name, has the ability to name the entire structure. That comes to 7 figures. I don't know that we would ever have that opportunity. But again, if we're going to set up a component where there are naming rights opportunities out there, we might as well cover the full game, from
Right.
naming an entire structure to naming the building. That makes sense?
Yeah. I don't know. I guess it's just me. I just have a problem with putting names on public buildings, especially since we have that Heritage Act where once you put it on there, you can't get it off.
Well, again, that's one of Doug's responsibilities is to make sure that what recommendation comes from staff or the committee considers, takes into consideration what you're talking about. Because I don't know, we would have to incorporate, to your point, Next clause when it comes to historical figures or a process.
Mhm.
Historical figures. Does that make sense? Point well done.
Thank you.
Anything else? Karen?
We had talked about, but I don't even know if it needs further discussion, but we had talked about the naming being for someone that contributed financially, but also that contributed with their time. And that as the school district, we know it would be inappropriate to name a school after a corporation or just a business that gave money just to have their name. And I feel like that might be inappropriate at Roper Mountain also. Like, for example, if a gas station, a local gas station was like, we're going all in on Roper Mountain and we're going to give them $10 million. And then this is going to be the local gas station building. I mean, yes, it'd be great to have that money, but we don't really want to have our buildings named after a, gas company. And it also might be a conflict if you, in that building, you want to talk about things other than using gas as a source of energy. Do you know what I mean? So if we just stick with the path of only naming for people who contribute financially and meaningfully with their time, I don't know that they would ever, could it ever be a conflict that came up like?
Everything's been named out there for the entire facility. Sims with the Sims family. Hayden Francis, same thing with Doc. Buck Miffle, family. Although I think Daniel wrote the check, still came out and recognized Buck for that third report. So everything out there so far has been after a perfect sheriff's point. Do we really expect or do you think that there's a potential for the conductor to come out there and say, we'll give you $10 million and name this building out?
We haven't pursued that.
Right.
Fortunately, we have on our board Tommy Reese, who is familiar with school district policy and has been very careful about how we approach some of the fundraising about what would be allowed with the district or not. And we have not approached anyone with naming the building or anything to that level. I'd love to find a 7-figure donor that then we could have that discussion, but that hasn't happened so far. I think personally, this is not the association and this is not the Science Center, but personally, I feel it's important that that building is the sustainability and environmental science building, that is key to defining its use and what it's there for, and that is what will bring public into that building, not the Sims building or the Harrison building. And I think that this new building that the school district built for us and only allowed us to put the finishing touches on, that building is what will bring the public in to Roper Mountain Science Center at this point, and then let them see the other areas. So.
I think we do this up. I think it's public conversation. We'll set the process up on how to deal with 7-figure contribution to the possibility. We'll put some safeguards in place to protect the school district. Fair enough. Okay. See the other board member that's not on the committee have a question. Okay, go ahead.
I want to make sure I understand what I heard. I guess more, but what I've heard. So there is a concern that we would not want company names. So I'm thinking, could be a gas station, but it could be some of these longtime donors like GE or Lockheed or Fluor or, or Prisma or Bon Scores that might say, this has become a critical area for us that we really think we need to focus on, and we want to make a donation and we want the name, the center, the Prisma Sustainability Center. I heard what Ms. Doolin said from the association standpoint. Did I hear you say you guys are also not, in your conversations, you haven't looked for a donor that you would want those naming rights, but you also wouldn't desire that?
No, that was personal about desire. I mean, I personally think I like it to leave it as environmental science and sustainability building. That's a personal statement, but we have not pursued selling the name of the building, the name on the building to anyone. Two of the major donors that we have each given $500,000 for exhibits out there. And we have not even pursued more of a donation from them because we feel like we can get support from a variety of companies who might then turn into annual supporters of the Science Center. I mean, that would be ideal, is if you bring them on board with a naming opportunity and then they become partners for the next 10 or 15 years with an annual donation. That's your ultimate goal, is to bring in the money that way. Yeah, but we have not approached the sale, the naming opportunity for the building with any donor at all.
Okay, and I like you. I like that it's the Environmental and Sustainability Center. I think that it says exactly what we want to say about the building. Personally, that's my personal opinion. But I do like that within the building, you see the names of the companies that are invested in the learning that's taking place, because that adds to and amplifies the career piece of it, right? That REWA is a place I can work. REMA Water Systems is a place I can work. Duke Energy, because those aren't the kinds of names, company names that a lot of kids think about. So, so I just wanted to be sure I clarified. So yeah, thank you. Thank you, Joe.
Based on what Lisa said, when those companies have their name on exhibits, those belong to the association. Is that correct? Those exhibits? Or
the exhibits, once they're installed in the building, they belong to the school district.
Even if they're temporary?
But even though it's installed, built structure, they are permanent. Anything that is put up in business comes under the care and ownership. We have to maintain something about buildings and besides the playground put in place. District takes ownership of the building and maintenance.
And when those exhibits, if they're eventually removed, that's the sunset clause for those. But or was that the intention, is that when those are removed, you do not have to name the next exhibit after the same company that paid for the first one, right?
That's correct.
That's the sunset clause on those. Okay, I got it.
So, I mean, I guess just not being a member of the committee, but just, I mean, the one suggestion I would make is I think our policy is better the less restrictive it is. And so before we kind of hash out what terms would be needed for a sunset clause, what terms would be needed for naming rights, it seems like it'd be easier just to add a phrase to the policy that just allows the board to change the names going forward on all things. And because because even the example of $1 million today is not going to be the same $1 million in 15 years. And I'd hate for us to put into policy that certain thresholds have to be hit in order for something to be permanent or not permanent that change over time. It just seems like it'd be easier just to have a clause that gives the board the authority to make changes. Then when we decide to renovate a building and take out rooms, the board has taken action to do that. Because I understand why we might not want to name an entire facility after a gas station, but I couldn't understand why, if the same request came from a different entity, we might not want to consider that. And so I just would caution the committee to be as less restrictive as possible about what we will and won't allow in policy, and then just leave it up to the board to have to approve all of those things. And then the board can address those as can.
To your point, math in my head, that 11 million.
That was four structures.
Roger.
What's the charge? Develop the process, maintain, facility, maintain structure, classroom. Maintain the products associated with it. And really the only thing you have out there is generally eligible. Focus right now, as far as the association is concerned, are classroom space. Sure. So this is more or less just a guideline. Because past work. So. Hasn't had the efforts. Has the last couple. Buildings kind of raised the level of this. They have the ball and run with.
Fundraising, I like that. Fundraise over and over, but if they want to name the tree after somebody or a butterfly garden after somebody, they should be able to do that in order to fundraise. I don't think that we should put any restrictions on it as far as that goes. As long as things that they put in the buildings have a sunset clause, but they're gonna want to fundraise here. And if sunset clause on, they pay this much, and it's for 5 years, they can sell that whole thing 5 years later. So,
Another check for the same person.
or get another check from the same person, so then we can put it on. I think that's part of their fundraising. If they want to name anything out there on the mountain, they should be able to.
Understood. Thank you. Does anyone else have anything? This has been helpful. I appreciate the three of you hanging around long enough to help us have this conversation, because I wanted the members of the committee to hear from you directly what your thoughts were as far as moving forward. And to the members of the committee, as I said earlier, we'll have a draft to you shortly. And then from there, again, our original goal of trying to have a recommendation to the board by the August Cal meeting, that's our goal. So we'll work toward.
Thank you.
With nothing else and no objection, I'll adjourn the ad hoc committee at 11:40.